Hey friends, I have something very special for you today. I have four amazing men with me, and we are here to discuss the topic of men's mental health. I'm very excited for this conversation, and I guess we'll get started. So I'll have them introduce themselves, starting with Garrett.
Hey everybody, my name is Garrett Carlson. I am a former high school English teacher, now full-time writer. I started a men's resource called Dudefluencer, probably late 2019, early 2020, where we really talk about kind of the redefining masculinity, what that means, men's mental health, and really the importance of community for men.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Uh, Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. So I'm something as a writer myself, but I didn't always start off like that. It was more exploring my own mental health and mental illness through my podcast that I started back in, I think it might have been 2019 as well. And yeah, then kind of finding myself through that. So yeah.
Awesome. And Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike. I have my own podcast and blog that focuses on mental health, which has been a really great opportunity to kind of share my own lived experience, but then also start conversations, probably similar to some of the ones we're going to have today. I also founded the Mental Health Blog Awards, which is based in the UK and kind of celebrates and recognises the work that goes on around story sharing and awareness raising in regards to mental health as well. Away from this kind of personal space, I now work for a mental health charity in the UK as well. So it's really nice to kind of have that insight, but also recognizing sometimes the importance to maybe step away from this space at certain times as well. So yeah, really looking forward to our conversations today.
Awesome. Thank you. And Brent.
Hi, so I'm Brent Lyles, pronouns he and him. I'm from West Palm Beach. For that, I'm a mental health counselor who specializes in trauma-based therapy, experimental therapy, and geek therapy as well. I identify with the personality traits of a Pisces and Enneagram 4, Wing 3, INFJ, and as an empath, as you can probably imagine, with all those kind of characteristics as well. I go by the handle of the geek therapist, and that's where you can find me at.
Awesome. I'm so excited to have you guys. Thank you so much for being here. So let's get started with my first question. So I'm a geek and I'm even wearing my Darth Vader shirt right now. And I do personal development for geeks and creatives. So my first question for you guys is, are there any movies or shows or fandoms that have either helped you during seasons of poor mental health, like helping you through something, or perhaps a character that you really personally connected with, or perhaps some sort of life lesson from a film that has stuck out to you?
So I know for me, there's sort of two different avenues. The first is I love sports movies, especially sports movies from when I was a kid. So the Return of the Mighty Ducks right now has been just, that is my Friday night cup of tea, sitting next to my wife, watching the Mighty Ducks, just reliving childhood. But those movies are really predictable. And, at the end of the story, there is always that happy ending, that sort of redemption arc. So when I have felt sort of behind or down, I watch those movies to sort of not only kind of go back in time to when I was younger, but also, seeing that growth over time, it really sort of motivates me as well.
I think for me, I was always really into my comic books and superheroes, and I think it was like a reality that I could escape. And even if I couldn't help myself with problems, there was these heroes who they encountered problems all the time and they overcame them. But the one show that really helped me and gave me a space to escape and taught me some kind of life lessons was Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Hmm.
And I think there's some really woven into it. Not only have they done a great job with building out the universe and creating this unique kind of experience when you're watching it, there's really, there's the goofy cartoonishness to the show, but then there's these really deep life lessons. It's quite like how Scrubs is as well. Like there's that comedic element to Scrubs, but then it goes like super deep really quick. And there's these major kind of life things like characters losing their lives and, people going through these metamorphoses. Um, and that helped me trying to navigate understanding who I was, and seeing these people go through it in the show was like, God, I'm not alone going through this. That would definitely be mine.
Yeah, I think probably similar to a few. I think there's an overlap with some of the comic book characters, but I think for me, kind of my experience with mental health illness and with depression, particularly coming as an adult, I think is maybe slightly different in regards to like I can't remember how the timelines work out, but like Silver Linings Playbook was a big thing in terms of kind of seeing mental health represented as a like a real focal point of a story, but not the only thing. There was kind of character growth and development and a storyline that went alongside that. So I think that was a big thing for me in terms of just acknowledgement of this being a thing. But also kind of not at the time of its release, but at a later stage, like going back and watching all the Marvel films, like the first Thor film, where there's so much about kind of the worthiness of a character. That felt like a really important thing. I can't say whether it was or not the first time I watched it, but kind of later on watching it back really felt like actually that there was a real connection there when I was struggling with kind of self-worth and self-value. There felt like there was a lot of messaging in that, and I know there's lots in other kind of Marvel films, but that was the one that really connected with me because it felt like there was a close tie to kind of my experience.
Yeah, I think for me, it's been animation, comics, and cartoons were kind of my safe space to escape the real world and kind of recharge my energy, especially with the inner child of my little Brent. And to go into this kind of thing where I call this introversion hibernation, where I need to recharge myself. I was blessed enough to grow up a lot with the 90 cartoons of Batman animated series, Justice League animated series. That stuck out to me were kind of like those go-to where I could go and kind of learn about things if I really wanted the dark elements with Batman, or even if I wanted to feel like the heroic aspect with the Justice League. Another fandom I'm a huge, and Anna's probably seen tons of stuff on my story in Star Wars. I love the universe and all its beauty. Besides the good, bad, and messiness of the fandom itself, it's such a go-to place. I go there time and time again to kind of escape from a galaxy far, far away.
And just to sort of hop on, Dan mentioned Scrubs. I also want to throw out there Ted Lasso. If anyone's seen that, love that show, and it's going to be something that I rewatch over and over again. I just kind of know it. He's such a heartwarming character, but I think they also do a really great job building. There's a quote. The only thing worse than being sad is being sad and alone. I think that's the quote. And that quote was just so impactful for me the first time I heard it. So I think there is a lot to take away from at least that show, and the creator of Scrubs created Ted Lasso at the same time. So
I've been really excited because I've seen there's an advert for like a new season coming soon. But yeah, I'm really excited to be getting married later this year. But I'm also already divorced, so kind of the storyline in Ted Lasso was kind of really again something that really hit home because of those connections with my lived experience. And I think it's really great to see more programs and more shows now dealing with some of those maybe slightly heavier, more personal aspects of people's lives, rather than just, oh, something happened in the past that's not part of this story, so we're not going to acknowledge it. And actually really including us in that journey of how their relationship kind of changed was really quite valuable. I think a really good storyline.
Yeah, I kind of like that Netflix show. Well, it wasn't a show; it was a film, Marriage Story, because I feel like that kind of links into what you were saying. That film showed such a kind of vulnerable side of and a raw side of these deep relationships. You know, it's an unhappy marriage, and then it comes to its conclusion, and you see a really toxic kind of breakdown as a result, and people really going out of their way to hurt each other. And it's all the things that you don't see in between, like what happens with childcare, you know, splitting up the assets and having the lawyers getting involved, and you know, they're maybe they've got their own motives to try and get what they can get, and yeah, it all just kind of gets from bad to worse. So yeah, I really resonate. I haven't seen Ted Lasso, but I've made a note of it so I can watch it. But Marriage Story resonated with me because of the same thing.
I'm curious to ask, as men, do you think, or anyone, I guess really, but since we're talking about men's mental health, do you think sometimes it can be a bit therapeutic or kind of help to witness these people, and you know, even though they're fictional, going through these experiences, things that are sometimes hard to talk about in real life, but to be able to kind of experience it through these films and shows?
Yeah, I mean, that's where we oftentimes learn, with books and television and movies, comic books. That is sort of where our learned behaviors initially come from. So as we're growing up, it is really beneficial to see young adult male characters going through this stuff, going through the same experiences that we have. Because when going through mental illness, loneliness, any of those things, it can be really terrifying, especially if you feel by yourself. And those movies and music and all of that makes you feel like you're part of something bigger. And that's, in my opinion, something really, really important.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same. Um, I learned from, I mean, the thing that's made me start talking about my own mental health was my dad, but there was a series of events that happened before that. And I think it's like you said, Garrett, like there's through watching shows and reading books, you almost learn how to talk about some of those things when there's a writer that's taken the time to construct a narrative that resonates or could resonate with someone. You know, it's like I always go back to Avatar, but there's some really powerful stories in there, and it might not even be a character having a conversation. It might be the revelation of a backstory or something like that. Like the one that always like felt like it jabbed me right in the feels was when you find out about Uncle Iroh's backstory, and you find out how his son passed away, and you know it's those well, it's stories where men are allowed to be vulnerable, and you see that, and it kind of it may give someone permission or be paving the road for them to eventually give permission to themselves. So yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of similar to Dan, it's seeing that permission happen. I guess that you can feel this way or you can experience this, and I think I don't know. I don't know if it's a comic thing. It feels like kind of film and media has changed a lot in the last couple of years, maybe 5. But before that, it really did feel like a traditional Channel 5 movie in the UK where there are 5 storylines. Like, there's as many films as you want, but there's 5 storylines. These are the storylines you're going to see. And it felt like that with kind of adult male characters. Like, there are 5. That's it. There's no variation on that. There's no different stories. And I think that now you sort of see these more complex characters. I think that really adds to it. I think for people that feel that maybe they've done something in the past that they no longer have a connection to, or felt particularly difficult about, if they're struggling with certain thoughts or behaviors, to actually see that replicated in some way and see a character arc, a potential recovery for that person, I think that's hugely important, because for the most part, up until the last few years, I don't know that we were really seeing that. And then, so if you are struggling with something, you have no role model, you have no guidance to go, this is possible. Where are all the people that felt like this? Oh, they're not here. So I think that becomes really difficult. So I think being able to see that representation of different types of male characters is really important, and that acknowledgement that kind of there will be someone else that's gone through something similar. It's okay to be different. I think it is really important, and we see that in kind of so many ways, representation being important, not just for the kind of the topic that we're speaking about today, but that realization that people are different, do think and behave differently, that can change over time. And also a big thing for me is kind of getting, and this is a personal thing, of kind of not necessarily thinking there's a right and a wrong. It's not just grey in the middle. There's so much colour and variation. We don't understand why people are making certain decisions and behaviour actions, and maybe they don't understand either. Whereas I feel like those older stories and older characters, there was a very clear line as to this is a good person and these bad things have happened to them, and they will kind of go on and always be good. And it's like, well, sometimes we make negative behaviours or negative actions, and that can be okay as well. So yeah, I think there's more complexity, and as Dan mentioned, kind of that representation becomes really important for everybody.
Yeah, I think Mike makes an excellent point where I feel that storylines and characters have so much room to grow now with proper representation instead of just the typical white cis male figure. There's more of a complexity with it, with the spectrum of how we show up as men, or even also non-binary as well. I know for me, within my family structure, something that was kind of like a baseline for me was Boy Meets World. I grew up on that and kind of felt very connected to that family and Corey Matthews and Eric Matthews. And that kind of helped me through some aspects of my life when I was a teenager, where I felt like I wasn't being seen, heard, or understood, because I was just considered weird, strange, and just odd. So I think characters in general, especially, allows us to connect emotionally, and it does provide an avenue, I think, as men, where we can have safer spaces to have those conversations. Or if a show or character resonates really well, wherever it's from Avatar: The Last Airbender or different types of comedies, having that diversified cast of men to look forward to instead of the atypical alpha male that we're deemed to and pressured to be and show up to the world really helps, because it allows us, when we show up so differently, to be like, hey, cool, I can actually relate to this character, and I don't have to feel that I need to meet this this pressurized version of how I need to show up as a male.
I think I just want to add on to the end. I think a big thing for me was also seeing Eddie Redmayne in The Danish Girl, of like, yeah, a different character, a different story. And I think that felt then, although that's not my story, of going, actually my story is different and that's okay. And I think those types of kind of stories being shown in such a visual way are so important, because they are potentially ones that we haven't heard before. So yeah, I think, yeah, that representation, those different stories, the different characters are so important.
And I think with all of the good in media, there is also still a lot of bad. And that relatability, it is just as easy to watch Boy Meets World or end up at another channel watching something that is just completely toxic. And when you're younger, it's hard to figure out and identify which one is right, which is the right one to do. Because the one thing that always irritates me still is just like the way mental hospitals are shown in film. It's always as used as like a horror set piece. And, you know, if that is your only experience with mental hospitals and therapy, why would you want to do that? Like, that is a really scary place. So while the media has done a better job, there is still always that work to do. And I think it's really hard to be able to, for people who aren't necessarily focused on trying to find something that they relate to be able to identify, all right, you know, this is a character that is making the right decisions. They're going to have, you know, if I follow this character's lead, I'm going to have a happier, healthier life. Sometimes it's really hard to identify which path is the right way.
Kind of going back to talking about how we're all different and being able to have that different representation. And I was also curious to ask, what's something that you've learned about yourself that helped in your own mental health journey? Like for me, a lot of it's, I've talked a lot on my channel about personality, but there's, you know, other things that can be included with that. Maybe it's some sort of diagnosis or something that you've learned in your own thought patterns or behaviors. And yeah, that's my question for you.
So for me, one of the really foundational moments of my time with my therapist was, and I joke about it because it is kind of silly on its own, but we're talking with each other, and he just said to me, "Garrett, you need to make friends." And it's just kind of a, you know, when I say it, it makes me chuckle, but also at the same time, like, I get what he was trying to say. I told myself, you know, I've got plenty of friends. I talk to people, I text people all the time, but what he was really talking about was I didn't really have those deeper connections at work with anyone. You know, I had moved 400 miles away from where I grew up, so you know, my friend circle is now 400 miles away. It's completely gone. And the realization for me was that I don't need to do things on my own. Self-care is really important, but also the community of people around you that you choose, that you build those relationships with, is just as important to taking care of yourself. So for me, that was the realization that really changed everything.
Um, yeah. Mine's a whole bunch of things, but I can pick out a couple just to so I don't go on for the hour and whatever we've got left. But for me, it's accountability. It's understanding that I'm in charge of you know, my life and how that goes. You know, it's not up to anyone else. If I want to have a certain career, or if I want to have a certain lifestyle or way about me, that's completely up to me. My recovery's up to me. My state of mind, you know, how I want to be as a person. So learning that accountability, like learning that actually, you know, the more I invest, the more dividends will be paid out back to myself. And going to therapy, I realized it was the best investment I could have ever made. I saw the investment right away, and as the years went on, you know, it was like a rolling stone. It just caught momentum and got better and better. So that accountability was really important, and then the self-awareness as well. You know, the more I learned about who I am, and then the patterns that I might go through, or you know, just being aware of things that have happened in the past and how those might influence your decisions for the future, and being aware of like my dynamics, so the relationships in my life, you know, to Garrett's point, your community that you have around. And yeah, just being aware of like I had to learn what emotions were some of them right from the very beginning. And that was really important to me, because once you know, usually knowing is enough. And even if you don't know what to do, once you do know, at least you can start to work with that and help yourself through journaling and things. So accountability and self-awareness, those two things really stick out for me.
If I may jump, we can come back for everybody else to answer too, but I wanted to jump in with a question based off of what Garrett and Dan said. So for the men listening, I was wondering if you have any advice for building healthy male friendships, because sometimes it's hard to find people that you can actually trust with those hard, vulnerable things. And so I don't know if you had something from your experience that kind of helped you connect with people, or what advice you might have for anyone to answer.
I think for me, I had a dilemma when I was going through my training to become a therapist, and the dilemma was that the network I had around me wasn't supportive. They were listening to what I had to say, but they weren't really hearing me. And I think for someone who's going through something, it's important to recognize when you're trying to have these vulnerable conversations or these deeper conversations, because not every conversation is those ones that you see in the movies. Sometimes it's just saying, I've had like a really tough day, or, it's just saying, I've got this thing going on and it's been going on for a while. And the ones that are going to hear you because they ask the follow-up questions and they want to listen, and they don't have the answers, and that's okay. They don't need to. It's just knowing that you're not on your own, and they might even share as well to help you. So having someone who's willing to hear you, truly hear you, and have empathy, that is more than I could have ever had asked for. And you can find a really good community online. There's a really strong mental health community. That's how I found Mike and Brent, actually, through Twitter. So Twitter's a really good place, I think. And yeah, also, not overlooking the people in your network. Don't take for granted the people who do hear you and listen, the ones that are close by, because I certainly did that with my own family. So yeah.
Dan, I liked what you said. There was a difference between listening to respond versus listening to understand. And I think a lot of people get that very thinking that they're one of the same, but they're totally not. And I think too, within at least the American culture, since I live within the United States, it's so easy just listening to respond and trying to give answers for awkward space, or even space in general of silence, instead of letting silence be there and be present for the person that is feeling the emotions, and then truly and deeply listening to that person while connecting to them. And there's different places and stuff like that through Twitter and through, I think, IG and stuff. I know for me, it's been recently joining men's groups, even though how uncomfortable that is for me. It's providing that extra challenge to connect with those authentic relationships with other men that I need to continue to heal those father wounds and those wounds that I have with other males. And through time, I do really think that helps with healing. It's just finding those spaces and reaching out and being able to use, I think, the benefits of technology that we have today versus years ago when we didn't have this.
And I'll kind of just add a little bit too. There's a book written by Billy Baker recently. He's a writer for the Boston Globe, and he wrote an essay that went viral about being in his mid 40s and realizing he didn't have any friends. And he's a bit more comedic, but when I was chatting with him about the book, there was two things that really stood out. The first was he was telling me that he went on the New Kids on the Block cruise, and he went there as sort of almost like it as an investigative journalist. He's He's like, I'm going to be, a guy here, and I'm just going to be watching the women and seeing how they make friends with each other. And the thing that he realized was they weren't afraid to be goofy. Like a New Kids on the Block song would come on, or Joey McIntyre would be doing like some sort of meditation, and they would be going crazy. They'd be dancing, singing, just having fun with each other. And they were building these bonds by just letting go. And I reflected on my own life and my own friendships. And, singing and dancing is reserved for either when you're drunk or at a wedding. And usually at a wedding, it requires both. So, that when I'm thinking about, those are the friendships that I'm really able to kind of take to the next level and really build upon. Who am I willing to be goofy? Who am I willing to, be sober and sing Adele with? Doesn't matter where. I think that for me is really like a key sort of, all right, this is something that I can build upon. This is someone that is willing to be vulnerable with me, and we can sort of share in being goofy, and we can talk about the more serious issues at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of people are just kind of waiting for permission, whether it's to be goofy and vulnerable in that way, or vulnerable with the deeper stuff, that sometimes it takes someone going first. So did anyone want to add anything else before we come back to our other question? So let's see here. Mike and Brent, did you have anything that you wanted to share about something that you learned through your journey that helped you in your mental health journey?
I suppose, like Dan, I feel like it's you start answering that with a big breath or a sigh, don't you? Go, oh yeah. There's some good, and there's maybe some that aren't as good, and I think it's important to acknowledge those as well. And I think for me, it's really interesting kind of hearing that last conversation. I think one of the things that I learned through kind of the experiences that I'd had, that I really struggled with trusting other people. So it wasn't necessarily it wasn't necessarily focused on men, although at that time a lot of my friends were men. And then so there's kind of that balance off there where it just felt really difficult to kind of trust or let people in. And I think that's there's probably something that sat in the background. My parents divorced when I think I was about 7 or 8, and it wasn't particularly a good experience. And I think so then having my own divorce as an adult really sort of lit all of those triggers that were sat in the background. So I think for me, sometimes it was just acknowledging that yeah, actually trust is a bit of an issue that I have, and it is a real thing that has to be worked on with people, to the extent that I mentioned earlier, like very fortunate to get married again later this year, and actually phoning up the 4 people that I've asked to be ushers, I put off for months, and I was really, really nervous about it because I was worried that they would feel pressured to say yes. And for me, it was like, I just don't want them to say yes because they feel like they have to, or like, what if they say no? And like everyone I'd asked was like, don't, like, they will say yeah. There's no one, and it's just really realizing that actually that still sits there. That ability to trust and let someone else in is a real difficulty. And I think that there are times when we have that expectation that, oh, my recovery looks like this, and by the end of it I won't be affected by these things anymore. And for me, a big part of that journey was realizing that actually personally my outlook was that these are things I'm probably going to be affected for the rest of my life. I'm just hoping to better understand and manage them. And I think everyone has different approaches. I do know people that have I call them 100%ers. They're like, I will get to recovery and this is what it will look like. And that works for some people, but I think I really struggled with that early on, having that mindset of that just does not feel possible to me. That's not what recovery looks like. That doesn't feel achievable. So I think that was a big thing to pick up and learn. And the things that kind of go alongside that, I guess, of these are things that support my well-being, and maybe in the future I'll need them less, but like I really struggle with silences. So knowing that, oh, there can be some music or a podcast or something going on in the background, and that kind of stops my mind from drifting or cycling, and going, oh, that's a really positive thing to help put those kind of support systems in place. And then gradually looking at how do you maybe not feel like that's a crutch that you're kind of leaning on continuously. So it's nice to have moments where I'm kind of mindful and there's silence, or I listen to the birds or whatever. But those are quite focused, very specific, and to an extent planned, because I know at the other times that's going to be more difficult for me. So I think for me, some of the things that I learned was about kind of accepting the things that I might struggle with and kind of better managing those. And to touch on some of the things that the guys have already mentioned, I think is also just thinking that it's not about waiting until I get to that crisis again before going for support. So some of my best experiences in therapy of when I've gone kind of a bit more proactively, I've gone, right, okay, I'm generally okay now. So now's a good time to go and look at this thing that I know is kind of sat there in the background, because I can actually take on board some learning points. If they give me some things to try, I'm well enough to try them. And if it doesn't go well, I can manage that. And I think that's really important for me. And also when we talk about men's mental health, because I don't think that's something anyone is encouraged to do, but particularly men, to actually go forward and be proactive and say, I'm struggling with this. I'm not in crisis, but I'm struggling with this. And I'd maybe just like a bit of help. I'd like to top up something. And I think when you're in crisis, all you can do is deal with the crisis. You're not really going to be able to learn or pick up skills. I think that's a really difficult, challenging time to do that. So I think encouraging people to kind of do that more proactively, and it's still something that maybe not this year, but I think in the future I know I'm going to be going back for other things that I still will need to kind of tackle and approach in an appropriate time.
Well said, Mike. And to piggyback of what everyone was saying before, I think that there is real power in transparency. And we look at the word, transparency and just simplify it to transparent. It's really just being see-through. And sometimes it does mean that sometimes that's us going forward with making a joke or laugh or dancing within the rain, or being able to be our authentic self, which is very shunned upon, and I think in our world, even though we hear it constantly that, like, oh, you should be authentic. It's easier said than done. For me, it's always been acceptance and change. And what I mean by that is acceptance into knowing that I had these crises that were happening in my life, from suicide attempts to mental health breakdowns. And then I needed to seek out help. And, there is so much power within therapy, why I became a therapist, because of the impact that it had in my life. And from that, it offers really the space of, again, acceptance and change to really happen with the right clinician or support team. Something that really helped me out was receiving diagnoses. And it helped, even though the language that I use with diagnoses, and, I have different varying opinions with that some of them should be considered or reclassified as disabilities instead of diagnoses or disorders. But for me, it was receiving, the diagnosis of being a neurodivergent individual who was ADHD. That was such a lifesaver for me, to know that, I had such a chemical imbalance that was happening on a day-to-day basis. And it really eased a lot of my stress, knowing that I just showed up so differently, and it wasn't my fault, and I wasn't this screwed up individual, that there was something that was in play that I had no idea of. And also find out that I lived with a major depressive disorder or PTSD, which are my two other diagnoses that I live with. And those were very helpful. And when I eventually found a clinician that was going to work with me, after I had several failed attempts with other clinicians. And for those who are listening, always keep trying and stuff to find a clinician that works for you. Just vet them out. You just don't know that one person is going to be the be all. And for what I tell clients often, or just people in general conversation, is just keep finding people. There's tons of such a diversified class of clinicians and therapists out there for different needs, or how we show up with our personalities. I'm kind of like Anna. I'm like a geek when it comes to self-assessment and stuff. Hence the reason why when I introduced myself, I was giving you so much of kind of like my personality. That helped to be able to find out why I thought the way I did, why I feel the way I do, how I receive information, how I export information out to people. And now, with being a therapist who is continuously in therapy, self-help books help a lot, podcasts, support groups, anything that I can get my hands on, that I'm continuing to become who I'm supposed to be in this world. And I think that that's enough. As long as we're taking a step forward, that is, enough for a lot of us.
So what are some other roadblocks that either you've experienced before you're able to see a counselor or reach out to a friend, or that you've seen other men experience? Like, what are some common challenges that kind of get in the way of seeking that needed help?
I think certainly for me, shame has played a big part of my life. And it's a terribly difficult thing to identify sometimes. Um, the self-talk language that you hear in your own head when you examine it's really tricky, because shame comes in the form of a friend sometimes, and it's it's kind of the friend that's holding a poison dagger behind its back, though, at the same time, because the thing that the behavior that you're investing in to, for example, not go to therapy, I can't talk about this. And it's trying to protect you from one pain, but actually it's causing you a greater pain, later on down the line. Like I had, I had a great trouble with shame in my life. So I hadn't been to the dentist for a long time, and it was because I was frightened after an experience that I had when I was a young adult, and the poor state of how I felt about my dental health, and it wasn't even that bad, but the shame of how I felt kept me from going back, and it was like a cycle that kept repeating itself. And I talked about how you have a positive rolling stone of going to therapy and it builds up momentum, but the same thing is true for shame as well. And it's incredibly difficult to break away from that shame cycle. And that was definitely one of the things that prevented me from going. And it was actually, like I said, my dad talking to me about his mental health that helped me break that shame cycle, because it was like, oh my God, I'm not on my own going through this. He's actually been going through it. He's gone to therapy as well. The it kind of cast this blinding light on the shame, and made it, this kind of big, instead of being this like cloud that was over my head.
Yeah, I think I guess for me it feels like weird things to say are barriers, but I think that "are you okay" feels like a barrier to me, because I don't know about other countries, but here in England that is very much a greeting now and not a question. And I have, I'm sure there are many occasions, but I have one very clear occasion in my mind when I'd been struggling and I was going around to see a friend, and I'd got in my mind, right, I'm going to town, and what's going on, and trying to have a conversation. And I remember walking in the door, and they said, like, "How are you? Or are you okay?" As I walked in, and I was like, "I'm not ready to answer that." So I just said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Went in, we started talking, and all the way through, I was kind of waiting for that question again. And I think something resembling that question came up, but as I knew we were about to finish, and I was like, I now again don't really want to answer that in the way that I'd prepared for. So I think giving kind of real care and real attention to, they won't know. But if you are kind of making a bit of time for someone, or you are really genuinely trying to ask how they are, give consideration to how you're asking that question when you're asking it. And maybe picking up on, maybe ask it again another time. Like we all will make slip ups and mistakes and say things that aren't received in the same way that they're meant. But I think being cautious that we, particularly in this group where we're very proactive around the conversations we're having, if people are listening, they might be quite similarly passionate about these topics, of being mindful if you do want to check in on someone else, like really give consideration to when that question's asked. And I'd say the other thing that I feel like was quite a barrier for me was probably, again, a weird thing of the consistency with which I would see the close circle of people. Because I was seeing those people on a daily or weekly basis, it felt very hard to sort of say, actually, I'm not okay, and I haven't been okay for months. And while I've been telling you I'm okay, that wasn't true, because it felt like I'd been lying. And it felt much easier to speak to people that I hadn't seen for months or years, because there's a wider conversation of just, oh, how are you? It's been so long. And it's like, oh, actually, I'm awful. And it felt easier to disclose and have that conversation with people that sat more on like a wider social circle, like an acquaintance level. So I think for me, yeah, like the frequency with which I was seeing those people that were not necessarily closer friends, but those people that I'd see on a regular basis, was a real tricky thing. Yeah, I think those are the two. There's lots of others, but I think those are the two that I'd say probably more so from my experience.
Yeah, along those same lines, I'm wondering what other tips you guys might have for someone who is the friend, who is, the family member who wants to check in on someone in their life. What tips would you give to, like you were saying that, like, for that friend to have maybe asked you again and kind of given more space for that, like how can we create those safe environments and like the opportunities so that people feel more safe to kind of be vulnerable and open up with us if they need to?
I think for me, it's, I guess, if you're thinking you want to ask someone, something has given you a reason. This isn't just like an everyday conversation. Something has drawn your attention. I think asking the person, like, oh, would you like to have a conversation? When would be best? Let them kind of have the option to decide, like, the time, the location, the environment, because we sort of make certain assumptions that people would rather sit in a quiet space and it be one-to-one, and actually that's not what everyone would prefer, because maybe that's a bit like the spotlight is on you. If there's only two of us, it's a bit interviewy, whereas if there's 3 or 4 people, there's a little bit less spotlight on someone. So it's really giving them permission to decide how that conversation is hosted in the environment. And I think there's also a big thing of, sometimes we kind of put ourselves in a situation where we're not always the best person for that. So like if I've noticed something with Dan, and I'm like, Dan's got something going on and I need to sit down and have a conversation with him, and he's like, actually, do you know, I don't want to speak to Mike. He is not the person that I would go and sit down and have a chat with, and I'm kind of forcing a conversation on him. I think it could be that I've asked and I'm the prompt for Dan to go, yeah, I would like to speak to someone. Definitely not you, but I would like to speak to someone, and then go and seek that conversation out elsewhere. So it's also realizing we're not always the best or the right person for that conversation. You might just be a prompt and you're never really going to know where that conversation's gone. But I think kind of genuinely knowing you've given someone an opportunity to open up, and maybe giving that opportunity a few times as well. So if they do want to speak to you, that you've kind of ended it with, if at a later stage you want to come and have a chat, come and find me, I think is a really good way to go.
Yeah, I would also, to kind of piggyback off of that, I think being proactive within your friendships it can be really, really impactful as well, and allow your friends to really recognize that you are there for them. There are, especially during the pandemic, it was really hard for me to be able to keep in touch with everybody. And it was to the point where, I was just putting in my calendar, text this person, text this person, text this person today, just to, say, hey, how are you? What's going on? And not necessarily checking in to see specifically how their mental health is going, but also just to check in to let them know, like, hey, I'm here, I'm present, I'm available. Do you want to FaceTime? Do you want to Zoom? Do you want to watch a TV show? And scheduling those times and those chats really can be impactful, just to make someone's day a little bit better even. Hey, I just got a funny meme from one of my friends. I was having a really hard morning and they made me laugh. So letting your friends know that you are present and you care is something that can really alter someone's day.
I really like everything you just said. Um, and a skill that I learned in counseling training that I really liked was congruency. So congruency is the ability to be authentic and say things as you see them. And the benefit is that it may help the client when you're in the room with them. If you say something when you see it, and you can take that same skill and kind of use it in a different way. And that's with, like Garrett said, in your friendship group. And I kind of think of it as observations instead of accusations. So when you're having those conversations with people, it's, how's it going and everything, and you're talking, and it's like, I've noticed you've been like this recently, or I've noticed that things haven't been so great. Instead of, you haven't been around so much, you've been distant, you've been off. And I think when you apply that congruency, being authentic and saying, just so you know, I've noticed that something's different. I see that you might be going through something that might just be enough. And I really like kind of taking the elephant out of the room as well. And that might be enough for that person to, like Mike said, they might not want to talk about it with you, but at least they're going, oh, okay, people are spotting this. So it's not just in my head,
So we've been sharing some of the positive ways that we can reach out, and then Dan so beautifully said some of the, the accusations, the way that we can cause some more harm than good by the way that we bring things up. And so I'm wondering if there's any other like harmful kinds of messages that are harmful things to say, like things to avoid saying when trying to, actually just at any time, not just when you're trying to start a conversation, but that was one of the questions I had, was what are some harmful messages that need to change?
I think with the messages, it's really looking at these systems that were in play. At least I know within America, the system of, how men and boys are supposed to operate and act. For instance, having this disconnection from our emotions, our feelings, to we have this devalue based on authentic relationships with other boys, girls, men, women, non-binary individuals. Again, the pressure to disengage or to devalue members of the LGBT plus community, right? And then there's this pressure to show up with anger at all times. That is an acceptable emotion over sadness, or to express shame or guilt that we're going through. Also to, being an adult, this pressure to show up with financial gain or this status of power. And I think when we look at it from a systems standpoint, it becomes overwhelming for a lot of times, especially with boys that are growing up to be men. And then, we have these missed opportunities. And, it leads into these conversations of these hurtful messages of boys and men don't cry, boys and men don't ask for help, stop being, enter trigger word of a homophobic slur, if we actually present that way or do that. So I think it starts with, for those of us who have kind of maybe come out to the other side, even though that's kind of cliche to say, but for those of us that have done the active role for ourselves, it's to start with us and start saying what we're accepting or not accepting anymore in certain conversations with other men or other boys or other women within the community itself. And that starts with us to be able to kind of have that accountability, or kind of what Dan was saying, have these non-threatening conversations where observations of being, hey, listen, I know we're joking about X, Y, and Z, but we're taking it a little too next far and stuff, and now it's kind of turned into like transphobia a little bit. And if someone was here that was trans, they would be very hurt by this, and now you're kind of making me feel uncomfortable with this joke, even though I didn't even want to partake in it. So I think it stands with us to be able to be kind of these guardians of what we want to see as change.
I love the term systems and accountability. I think that's really important. And I think something else that you touched on was also, someone else said it better than me, so I'm just going to steal their phrase, a curious mindset, which is this understanding that we're going to be always interacting at some point with someone who has a behavior that is unhealthy, that is inappropriate, a point of view that might be very different from ours. And the point of the curious mindset is not to just say you're wrong, but have empathy and understand where they're coming from, so that that conversation you can actually have in order to help them see the other side. Because when I think of systems, I think of growing up as men, we are taught very specific things. We're not supposed to cry. We're supposed to be tough, all of these things. And something that it took me a really long time to really figure out and understand in my head was, there are going to be men who grow up this way, who have been taught this way for 30, 40 years of their life. And if we say you're wrong and that's it, it's really hard to actually get them to make any change, to even have a conversation and understand. It's having empathy that, yes, society has helped construct these viewpoints, these beliefs. Society has made it okay in some form or fashion for you to say these things, and it's not. And I'm going to push back on you, and I'm going to hold you accountable for what you say and what you do. And I'm also going to understand that this is how you have been raised for, 30, 40 years. And those fixes, those changes don't happen overnight. So it's a process that I wish could happen faster, and it's a process that can't. And I think what Brent said, holding ourselves accountable, holding our friends accountable, and being aware of everything else that's kind of at play in society, really can make a difference.
I love that. That was so, both of you guys, that was so beautifully said. And where it's not just calling people out, but it's understanding even where they were coming from too. This balance of truth and holding people accountable, but also understanding that individual person too.
It sort of weirdly reminds me from what Garrett was just saying of I remember when I used to watch like X Factor and those type of kind of music talent shows, and I would just remember them always saying it's easier to teach someone that has no experience and someone that's like picked up all of these bad habits, like they've done gigs in dive bars and stuff, and they've got these habits where they do some weird stuff with their voice because it works in like the bingo hall, but it won't work here on stage. And yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? That we've all learned these behaviors, we've learned these ways to view people, to judge people. And it's kind of all very well us saying now, actually, I feel like there's a better way to do this. We we need to understand the backgrounds that people come with, to understand that kind of we ourselves are more complicated than we previously knew. But we've got that history that is there, and if you still have those people around you that kind of raised you with some of those values, or you grew up with some of those values, it's very difficult to suddenly go, oh well, that's now different for me, when they might continue with those. And I always try to be very careful, because I think we make the assumption that it's parents, grandparents, and it's the older generation that have those values, and actually there's a lot of young people with those values as well. And I think it's having that realization. This is it's a long journey, and it's being understanding of the people that are around you and of yourself, that there might be things that you want to support someone with, and if they mention to you that they're struggling with certain aspects of mental health or anything else to do with their identity, but you've never had a conversation around that, you might find that quite difficult just to hear. And to be able to support that, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you have to have the answers. It's just realizing actually quite a lot of us, I'm making a judgment now, quite a lot of us come from quite closed communities and closed conversations. And we're really fortunate that now, through a lot of online, those conversations are opening up, but it's causing issues with our identity, with our concerns around how we appear to open ourselves up, but also to be part of conversations. Oh, does it mean this if I'm involved in the conversation? So I think it's really important to be kind to ourselves, and understanding that we're all going to come with different mindsets. There's a big thing in mental health, isn't there, about don't be judgmental. I struggle with that because we're all judgmental and we will continue to be. It's trying not to invest in the judgments that we make. That I can't see a world where I don't judge someone as soon as I see them. But it's trying to go, okay, that's fine, and just not investing in that and getting to know the person. I think I think everyone's kind of mentioned it separately before. It's realizing that there's certain things that we're going to do automatically, and kind of stepping away from that a little bit.
I think if I think about harmful messages as well, it's people saying that they know how you feel when you're talking about your experiences. And again, it was actually something prior to my training that I had. I can recall conversations where I did that. So like, I went through the training, and it was like, gosh, like you can never really say that you've been through anything that anyone's been through, because you don't have the same lens that they're looking through life at. You've not lived all of the experience that they've lived through up until this point. So I think whilst the intent is there to make that other person feel as though they're not alone, sometimes it can actually really annoy the person that you're trying to have a vulnerable conversation with, because they're like, how could you possibly know? And it actually opens the door as well, if you do it properly, to be like, actually, I don't know what it must be like to go through this. I can't imagine, but help me imagine if you want to open that door, I'd like to understand. And going back to like what we were talking about earlier, it can help that person and reassure them, be like, okay, well, they don't get it, but they want to. That's nice.
That's very well said. You guys keep answering my questions before I even ask them. It's so great. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess so. Before we move on, though, if there's any other harmful messages that you wanted to bring up for discussion.
I feel like the negative stuff. I love the negative stuff. Is one for me is the like, it'll be okay. And I think it's one of those, Dan kind of touched on this, is it comes from a really kind place, and it comes from people wanting to show you compassion and wanting to show kind of some sort of affiliation with what you're going through. But often I find it comes off really dismissive, of actually all that stuff you've just told me, not really that bad, it's not really that serious, I don't know why you're worried about it. And I think that's a reason why when we have conversations like this about what are the things not to do or what are the things to watch out for, I would say much rather you have a conversation and say the wrong thing, and that person leaves the conversation going, I'm never speaking to them again, because you've at least tried, you've at least hosted that opportunity, and they might say, that wasn't great, I'm not going to talk to you, but they might seek out someone else. Because otherwise we just avoid the conversations. And I think there's loads. Like Dan, I get a little bit annoyed with the I understand, but it's that kind of again, I think it's the dismissing or the idea that we sometimes try to show an understanding by saying, I've been through something similar. That gets me, because maybe you have, and maybe your situation, maybe it was much worse, but it wasn't much worse to me. And I think that's sometimes the trying to balance those conversations, and that's where a lot of the earlier stuff of how has that conversation been hosted, what's the rapport between two people, means you will both as the listener and the kind of the speaker or the discloser will be kinder to each other in that conversation, and will forgive things that you maybe wouldn't forgive someone else. So that I know if I sit down with you guys and one of you says, I understand, I know where it's coming from, and I'd be okay with that. I might go, but I'd be okay. Whereas I think if I sit down with someone else and they say that, that might be the thing that kind of shuts me off from that conversation. So I think setting a good rapport at the beginning is really important. And even maybe saying that, like, just thanks for sitting down, and maybe I'll say, I think you said this, Anna, at the beginning, like maybe I'll say something that doesn't quite connect with you, or I might say something wrong. And it just sets that scene to make everyone feel a bit more comfortable to go, yeah, that's fine. Because it was in our minds anyway, but just hearing that really opens it up a lot more, I think.
So in what way, I guess, would be helpful if someone is wanting to help someone not feel so alone, like by sharing like a Me Too kind of thing, but without, taking the attention off the person and putting it on yourself, but like helping them not feel alone. I'm just wondering what advice you guys might have for that.
I think it's just to piggyback with what the other gentlemen were talking about, it's just holding space, keeping in mind that we don't fix people, because when we get into that fixing mentality, it really communicates and sends this message to us in general that we're broken. In actuality, a lot of us are not broken. If you think about it, we just go through these different life experiences and we become stuck, or we don't know any better because that's all we've known to kind of survive in the world. That has kept us safe, with safety and security, from a trauma aspect. And I think when we have good intentions, it is enough. Even, I know for people that ask me a lot of times, what can I do? And it's like, maybe, you call the hotline with somebody. Maybe it's you helping them get to that next point, or maybe offer like, hey, do you need me to go to therapy with you? I know that's really awkward and stuff, and I've been before. Do you want me to wait in the waiting room while you go? So that way you if you feel like you have a bad session or something, at least I can get you coffee afterwards, or we can go see a movie. I think that says so much more value than just trying to fix people.
Yeah, something that my friend does really, really well is when we're having a conversation, or he's having a conversation with someone, he will early on in the conversation ask, do you want me to listen or respond? And just that like really simple question changes the dynamic of the conversation. Because I know from my experience as a person, my initial thought is always, all right, what is the solution? Like, try and solve something when, someone is talking to me, they don't want me to solve their problem. They just want me to listen to them. So by asking that question, it gives me a check to stop myself before I do something that my friend doesn't want me to do in our conversation. So something even as simple as that really helps with the dynamics of conversations and relationships.
I think that's my favorite thing that you've said. Yeah.
I've written that down.
I have as well. I'm learning something. I am. It's so good. I don't really think I have anything to say. I think Brent hit a really good point as well, like holding space for someone. It means more than you know to that person. And that question that your friend asks, do you want me to respond or just listen? That's going back to what Mike said earlier. It's like setting the stage at the start of the conversation and helping give that person an opportunity to decide and exert some control about how they disclose things.
Yeah, that's some really great advice, and that's something that I've been trying to implement in my relationships as well. To, like you guys said, setting the stage and giving them some power and some control of like, how are you wanting to go about this? What do you want from me? Instead of just assuming what the person needs. So I think that's when we run into a lot of problems, when we make assumptions about what's best for someone, what they might need. And it's coming from a really good place, but it can end up not being as helpful. So I guess now, switching over a bit, I wanted to ask you guys, what are some things, big or small, that you do or have done to take care of your mental health? What are some things that have been helpful to you?
I think for me, therapy's been, like absolutely seismic to changing my world. And creating space in my head for other things. So I'm not kind of sleepwalking through my life anymore. And then I don't really have like a self-care routine of such because I'm massively disorganized, so I don't even have routines a lot of the time. But I guess I have like safe spaces and tactics or hacks that I do. And for me, I love driving. So when I need to think and create space in my head, I do that by physically moving and getting away. Going for a walk as well, that really helps. And putting on some music or a podcast, or sometimes just nothing at all. And more recently, I'm trying to do better at physically looking after myself. And like men are kind of stereotypical where we don't always look after ourselves like stereotypically as well as women do. So like, it might be like looking after your skin, taking yourself to the dentist, you know, just those little things of looking after yourself, like changing your bed, like your bedding on a regular basis, like washing your clothes so you've got like nice, fresh smelling clothes. Because like when you're in that like depressive state, doing those things for yourself can feel really hard. So having therapy and maybe clearing out some of those things can leave you in a better space where you might want to look after yourself. And doing that has really helped me. And journaling as well, it allows me to continually kind of tidy up that space in my head where I kind of see it as like a garage, and it's completely full before you go to therapy, and you have a massive moving out day and you chuck a load of stuff in the skip, and then you keep the stuff that you really want to keep and unbox at a later date. But as you go throughout life, that garage is going to have more stuff put in it, and you're going to need to deal with those things. And journaling is a really nice, safe space for me to be able to do that as well.
I love how you use the organizing of the outside world and the organizing of the internal world. You just covered all those good aspects that are all connected and good stuff.
I think just to follow on from Dan, so I don't have to mention the journaling part, I just go, yeah, I also find that helpful. But I think it's, particularly this year, I think it's been quite a challenging time, depending on what your kind of coping strategies are. I think for me, like going outside, spending time in kind of nature has always been quite a helpful thing. And I say a fairly not necessarily good, but a fairly keen runner. And kind of the middle to late last year, I got quite a bad knee injury, which meant I couldn't run. So it really is limited through either lack of physically being able to do it, or through social restrictions, not being able to go to kind of locations that had previously meant a bit of a mental reprieve or an opportunity to reflect. Like we have kind of beaches that are near us, probably not comparable to some of yours, but we have those spaces. And actually for me, that opportunity to kind of sit and reflect and be mindful has in the past been a really key thing at certain times. So to kind of go, oh, those places are now inaccessible because they're too far away or kind of too populated at certain times, has been a kind of a readjusting phase over the last year of going, okay, what else supports my well-being? So I think it has been a good year to kind of, for everyone to evaluate, how do we support our well-being? What kind of things have we picked up in the last year? There has been, at certain times, a really good national focus on mental health, on the reflections that it is going to have been impacted whether you have an illness or not. And I think that's been a really useful thing as a reminder to go, okay, like you really need to be quite proactive with this. But yeah, I think as Dan said, having those opportunities to also access professional services, so if it's therapy or counselling, I think is really important. And again, often something that, like I said earlier, it's very much kind of seen as that's for people in crisis. And I think it's so important that people engage proactively in those. And maybe it's even it's just a generally kind of checking in with someone as a wellbeing activity, even if you're not struggling with something. There's kind of so much I think is really important to pick up on there.
And to echo what everyone else has said, like therapy, yes, like 100% best decision, one of the best decisions I ever made. And also something else that Dan mentioned that I really liked was sort of these self-care routines. For me, something that I was always very self-conscious about my looks when I was a teenager, and that really affected my self-confidence, and it affected my mental health at the same time. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten a bit more into like, this is what makes me feel good and look good at the same time. So like combining those two has really been beneficial to my mental health. So something as simple as just starting a skincare routine has made me feel, has helped me out I always used to tell when I was teaching my students, like, you can tell when I am having a rough week if I come in with my beard shaved or my hair cut. Because like it's almost like I need a change, like a physical change that I can see to say, okay, whatever I'm going through, I can see past it. I can go past it. But it's also, when you get a good haircut, you walk out of the barber and you look good, you feel good. Same as, when you find that like shirt that just fits you perfectly, or that suit or whatever it is. Like there is science that says when you look good, you feel good. And I think that does affect your mental health in a way. And it's something that often is overlooked because grooming can be seen as like traditionally a feminine thing. But whenever I have asked my friends if they've had a pedicure, like every single one of them has told me it's the best experience of their life. And like it's amazing. It's incredible. So I think it is something that is starting to change in terms of how men are taking care of themselves. But I think it's a simple step. It's an easy step. It's, we already brush our teeth. We already shower. We already shampoo our hair. It doesn't take much to find a skincare routine and just put it on your face every morning. Like it's very simple.
I just want to give a shout out to Garrett's blog, The Dudefluencer, because I've seen that you have some great content there on men's self-care.
Yeah, I think for me to kind of piggyback out the conversation is continued therapy. That's done wonders. I tell clients constantly, one of the best things I can do as a therapist myself is continuing to seek out support and help for myself. Where if it's, something that's more strength-based, or having a space where I can vent and process things, or I feel like I need a challenge in life. Therapy can be used in so many different ways outside of just a crisis situation. For me, I've gotten in a routine of attending like a men's group that I go to called the Council of Dudes from a life coach that I've met through a life coaching program. And I've kind of forced myself to go once a month to these things. And it's been very beneficial to kind of get out of my comfort zone. Which is where a lot of growth happens, is making sure that we don't sit and stagnant and staying stuck. It's constantly pushing, again, with safety and security in mind, that allows us to move forward. Something for me, at least how I show up with my personality, is this thing I'm going to steal from John Kim with the handle, The Angry Therapist I follow on IG, and I actually have met several times online and have had dialogue with, is this notion of seeking nectar. And nectar is kind of like honey. And it's kind of what Mike was saying, like this mindfulness aspect of being present, of finding what brings me joy and bliss in the moment. And even if I'm going through another deep depression spell, or I'm not in a good space mentally or physically, I make it a point to at least find something that brings me some type of satisfaction. Or if it's spending time with my son, or taking a car ride, I'm blaring music and I'm like screaming at the top of my lungs on the way home from work because I've had a horrible day at work. Or being able to watch the new Marvel shows that I've been looking forward to, and instead of watching when they release, I stack up them up back to back to back, so then that way I can have like several hours I can watch new content and stuff to re-energize myself. And again, Garrett made a great point too. I think it's not well talked about, but again, this self-care of like maintenance, to be able to have great skincare regimens, to get haircuts, to buy new outfits, and to feel confident in ourselves is huge, because we're not taught that. It's very much like applied that this is how we should show up as men, but there's not really like this like behind the scenes of oh, if you like this aspect of getting a haircut once or twice a month, do it. If you like skincare regimens, which I do as well, or I don't use any men products when I shower. I use all women's. My wife has gotten used to buying more stuff that I've liked with scrubs and different stuff. And, there's nothing wrong with that, and just becoming comfortable with that aspect of what we deem as unacceptable because it's feminine, instead of letting it just be gender fluid, where it's just, it works for me or works for us in general.
It's always kind of funny looking at men's grooming products because they're all like designed in the same packaging, just like super gray, super black, and like one word, whatever it is, it's just one word. And if you look at the ingredients, like it's the exact same ingredients as any other grooming product, but it's for men, so I do hope that if there are any like men's grooming enthusiasts listening or potential entrepreneurs, like they start to kind of just make products that are gender fluid. Like it's going to be the same stuff anyways. I think the advertising can be really ridiculous.
Don't get me started on pink tax for the ladies. I know this is the men's talk today, but
I was thinking that when Brent was talking, I was like, you're just buying the expensive ones. The one with a black cover is cheaper. The pink ones are more expensive. I think it's a really interesting conversation, isn't it? I'm sure we could get into like that idea of like that we gender items is just so weird. Like I have it a little bit when we talk about sort of accessible toilets. Like I don't know different names in different places, but they're often referred to as disabled toilets or disabled access toilets here. And it's like, I don't understand how a disabled toilet was ever a thing, because it sort of implies the toilet, in my head, maybe it's my dyslexia, it implies the toilet is disabled. It's a toilet. How can it be disabled? I don't get it. It's an accessible toilet because there are extra kind of access things that have been added to it. It's just so strange how we assign certain traits to things that are just created items. Yeah, it's very strange. I'm sure it's often for marketing purposes, but it is a strange concept, I think, of the way we approach things.
this has been so great, you guys. Thank you. We've already, I'm sure, kind of answered this question, but I wanted to end out on what mental health advice or encouragement would you give to the men listening? Whether it's kind of recapping on something you've already said or something that you wanted to make sure to say that you hadn't said yet. What advice or encouragement would you give to the guys listening?
I think for me, it's if you're the friend of someone, hopefully you've got lots of nuggets from what everyone has said today to be able to approach and have some of those brave conversations with people. And if you're going through something yourself, you're not on your own. As much as it may feel like that, and even hearing the words now, you may be questioning it still, and it's okay. I'd encourage people to look into personal development if counseling or therapy isn't an option. Personal development is something that I've thrown myself into for the last 4 years, and it has transformed my life just as much as therapy has. I picked up journaling through personal development, for example, not traditionally like you would through therapy. So I'd highly recommend that people do that. And there are great resources out there, and there are phenomenal people on the internet who put great resources out. People like Anna who've got blogs, people like Mike who's got a podcast. There are amazing people out there, and you can connect with and learn from. So I'd highly recommend that, because personal development, other than maybe the books that you buy and things like that, it's largely free. There's so much free information out there. And just, you know, start exploring what's going on upstairs, in whatever capacity feels comfortable.
I think just to follow on from Dan there, I think we're really fortunate there are so many people now sharing their insights, their lived experience with mental health, that you will be able to find someone that's been through something similar or has some sort of connection to your experience. So I think that's a really positive thing, that whether it's for a blog, a podcast, a YouTube video, or wherever, there's an opportunity to hear some of those conversations and listen to those. I think a big thing for me is, we mentioned it earlier, is kind of hosting those conversations. I think is really important, and asking open questions as much as possible. So letting the other person decide how much they're going to tell you. If they're going to tell you anything, that shows you care, you're there to listen, and you're there to hear whatever they've got to say. I think that's really important. And I guess one other thing would be that even when we've spoken about it today, we've spoken based on prompts. I've noticed something that's changed. Trying to make kind of mental health part of our everyday conversations. It doesn't have to be, I've noticed something, or you're worried that someone might be going through certain things. Making it part of our everyday conversation, I think, is so important to kind of normalize the conversation as much as possible, to remove some of that stigma that exists within society. But as kind of Dan really eloquently spoke about earlier, also kind of that self-stigma that many of us experience. I think hearing those conversations, being able to talk about the positive stuff, there's positive things in mental health as well. There's all of the awesome well-being tips that the guys have mentioned today. That's all part of our mental health. That's part of our well-being. That's part of the self-care that exists as well. And I think gradually we start to kind of remove this idea of the very stereotypical, very old-fashioned, very incorrect view that many of us have when we say mental health. We do think of the asylums and the images that we're shown in old films. We do think of people that just can't relate to. And I think, while that may exist in some situations, for so many people, that's so far away from what they're experiencing, it doesn't give them any permission. It doesn't make them feel kind of valid or part of that. So I think just encouraging those conversations to happen as frequently as possible and in whatever way kind of suits, I think is so important.
And yeah, completely agree with everything Dan and Mike said. And also to sort of follow their train of thought. There are going to be lots of people on the internet, so definitely find your space that really fits who you are. Because while there are all of these great resources, there's also going to be resources that can be manipulative. If they call you weak, if they make you feel bad about yourself, that is a sign to just get away, to walk away, find someone else. And I think the beauty of the internet and more people speaking up about mental health is the fact that there are more experiences. I know my experience isn't the same as everyone else in this Zoom room's experience. So I might be able to relate to someone, but they might not be able to relate to me, whereas they might relate more to Brent or Mike or Dan. And like, that's okay. So as we continue to normalize the conversation, there's going to be more of those spaces available for you to find. So always kind of search for the right space for yourself, the space that you are going to be made the best version of yourself.
Yeah, I think all the gentlemen here made excellent points and stuff. And again, it's just normalizing conversation around mental health and what that looks like. And if we can do that in daily conversations, wherever it's the good, bad, or messiness of it, I think that's enough. And I think that people just showing up in spaces is enough. And, you know, Garrett made an excellent point. It is being able to find kind of your community. And if you don't, just keep searching it, wherever it's through Facebook or IG or Twitter or Reddit, TikTok, you name it. I think the best thing that we can do is just build that awareness and try to connect to ourselves, our authentic self, to the best that we can, and see what we like and dislike, and use that as kind of like a journey in the sense of going forward into what we think that we need in form of healing. And a lot of times it's just taking the first step and just knowing that it's going to be trial and error many times. And, just because one bad experience doesn't mean it's going to be one bad experience at all. It's just going to be able to find the people that you feel safe with, and being able to reach out to those safe spaces and those safe communities that are all around there. I do think that we're very fortunate to be in, where we're at right now. And even though we've experienced such a huge trauma with the pandemic and how it's impacted us, something that is a cliche silver lining is that we've really have been forced really to create these safe spaces more through Zoom, through Google Hangout, through different formats and stuff, or Twitch, or wherever you can name it, these spaces. And, everyone's there. It's just being able to reach out and just trying. And I know, for myself, if you're listening, if you need somebody, you can always reach out and stuff. I'm always up for conversations and pointing people in the right directions. And I'm sure everyone on this panel that's speaking as well do the same as well. It's just having that awareness just to say, hey, I need some help, or can you kind of guide me in the right direction? And, that is enough.
Wow, guys, this was all so good. And thank you so much for your time and showing up as your full selves and being vulnerable. And this has just been so good. And I'm so grateful. And I'm sure those listening feel the same way. I will have links down below to all of these guys, their social media. And if they have other sites and such, I will make sure to have that available. Thank you, guys. And until next time, keep it real.